Thank you everybody for joining today's call. We will be getting started here in the next few minutes. We're waiting for a few more people to join. Okay, welcome to today's presentation. Today we're going to be talking about a template for learning from Crisis. There's going to be some discussion at the beginning. We're going to tell you a little bit about who we are, so let me go through the agenda. So in today's agenda, we're going to be doing some introductions of who you're speaking to and who's going to be on the call. We're going to walk through the 7 steps for writing an after-action report and organizational examples. So what can we learn from those disasters that have already happened? We're going to be talking about some next steps, and then finally, if we have time, some Q&A. So speaking of Q&A, you should see there on your the GoToWebinar link, there is an area there for questions. So if you have some now or throughout the presentation, if anything comes up, please go to the questions area and type those in. If we have time at the end of the presentation, we will certainly answer those. If, however, based upon the content here today, we don't, we will definitely be following up with individuals with answers to your questions. Okay, so today, my name is Daniel Wagstaff. I'm the CEO of PocketStop, and PocketStop is a software company that provides communication platforms that are used for in the case of a crisis and in the case of an emergency. So our platforms work well as part of an existing crisis plan. So it's the ability to notify the right people at the right time with the right message. Because obviously during a crisis, it's all about being prepared on the front end, but then being able to inform and then gather information. And that's what we help you do there at PocketStop, is inform your audience, inform your employees or your tenants, and then gather information from them in real time to see who's safe, who needs help, and any other updates from the field that you may not have based upon where your location is. It is my distinct pleasure to also welcome today's call, Paul Reinhardt. Paul has spent 22 years performing real-world planning, issue management, crisis media relations, disaster response, and risk communication. He's led communication efforts during dozens of natural and human-caused disasters, communicating health and safety information to affected stakeholders via community outreach and traditional and digital media. He served as principal federal spokesperson at the national level in markets like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Tampa, St. Petersburg, Miami, and Washington, D.C., conducting hundreds of TV and radio print interviews. He's a veteran of the National Strike Force Public Information Assist Team, a special unit with a mandate to respond to hazardous material and chemical releases, as well as the natural and human-caused disasters around the world. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to pass it over to you for the next section of our presentation.
All right, thank you, Daniel. Appreciate it. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. To make sure we got it working here with the click. Give me a couple seconds. It's taken my software a bit of time to catch up to y'all. There we are. All right. We talked about this before, actually, how certain people have an aura about them that tends to send negative vibes to technology, and I'm one of those people at times. So we're having a bit of a technical difficulty here getting to these slides, but there we go. Okay, I think we're there. All right, so apologies. Daniel, thank you. Thank you for having me. Now I'll get right to it. I'll venture to guess that most of you are familiar with after action / lessons learned type concepts. And I'll use those two terms interchangeably throughout. But what I found over the years is that organizations, though they're aware of them, they don't really put enough emphasis on them. And when they are used, they're not really being used very effectively. So I think we'll all agree that we learn best by doing. In the process of capturing what we do as an organization, locks in successes for duplication in later events, as well as, maybe more importantly, mitigates that frustration of repeating past failures. So the benefits that I've gleaned over the years from having a consistent AR program includes some of these here, and I'll go over them real quickly. But number one, providing leadership with a clear picture of your team's important incident actions. It gives them a clear picture, and that helps sort of inform their decisions, especially in particular in terms of how those decisions support what you're trying to do in your efforts. So you want to keep those folks informed, and that's a great way to do it. And if you partnered with individuals or other entities outside of your organization to mitigate a particular disaster, this helps to close the loop as well in that particular partnership. It provides those entities with key takeaways that you deem the most valuable. Obviously, after action reports affect organizational preparation for the next crisis. It bolsters the parts of your plan that worked, and it provides recommendations for the sections of your plan that need to be improved. A good communications after action report can also be incorporated into larger multi-organizational reports, which means that you potentially have the potential to affect big change in a way that an organization or other organizations conduct their incident response. And finally, it can't be overlooked the value of an after action document to preserve sort of the corporate knowledge of best practices. So as new team members come on or managers come on board, they can reference those as well. As with all things related to crisis, and I think Daniel mentioned this in his introduction, the key really is preparation. And after action reports aren't really a very heavy lift as long as you prepare for them. They need to be concise, obviously, as possible. But really, with that conciseness, they also have to contain everything that is meaningful for the next incident. So, for an example, an after-action report we put together on the initial response to Hurricane Katrina consisted of 22 pages, and that was all very relevant information. But yet another one covering several weeks we spent at a major oil spill in San Francisco Bay prompted a 3-pager. And these are big incidents, though. So, a lot of the incidents that you will deal with on a regular basis probably only require a 1-page wrap-up, but again, extremely important. So over the next 20 minutes, I want to touch on the tips you see here. I feel like these are ultimately the ones that create the most useful after-action reports. So number one, manage expectations. Employees and other internal stakeholders should know ahead of time that the communication aspect of any incident is only going to be mission complete when that after-action report is completed and then forwarded to the appropriate readers. If you have a crisis plan, you need to write something in there that outlines an after-action report program, process, procedure. If you don't have a crisis plan, write one, and then write in a section for how you'll implement those lessons learned. Keeping track of what you do and say during the actual incident. Even a one-day incident can be very hectic with a lot of different moving parts. So keeping track of noteworthy events as they happen eliminates the frustration of trying to recall what happened after the fact, which is very difficult to do. Job aids are really good for this. In my time with the National Strike Force, I would bring a bundle of what we called daily unit log forms to every incident. These are the ones that you see here on the screen. These forms were designed specifically for documenting daily activities, and you'll notice that they're not exhaustive in detail. We use them to track significant items only. There's no need to log bathroom breaks or coffee runs, although there was plenty of those, but just the highlighted items and actions. We also had a practice that some of you might be familiar with called basically maintaining what we called a case book. And this is a physical or electronic collection of documents that are generated during a crisis. It includes all the press releases, the interviews, the articles, outreach activities, internal messaging, etc. Basically anything that documents what was said by an organization, what was said by external entities about the organization, and what was said to employees. Basically, to keep it simple, we would essentially keep a big box in the corner of the room we were working out of for people to literally dump clippings and dump documents in. We'd also set up a shared folder for people to drag and drop documents. And depending on how long the incident lasted, we'd go through and organize occasionally, but otherwise we just dropped and forgot it until things started winding down. But what you find is when you start going through something like that, no matter how long the response, that casebook will be an invaluable collection of references for any post-after action report. Next, and this sort of goes with what we were saying before, but you want to gather input as soon as possible. People come and go from prolonged incidents. During the 6-month response to the Deepwater Horizon spill, I think we saw people coming and going every week. Some would stay for 2 weeks, others would stay for 2 months, and every length of time in between. So here you see a form I filled out after one of my several rotations in and out of the Gulf region after Katrina. Each responder was actually required to submit this form before they left the incident, and you'll note this form was broken down into 4 main parts, but yours doesn't have to necessarily follow this exact format. You won't, a lot of times you won't always have the time to produce a template like this. This is something that we put together a few weeks in. And in those situations where you don't have that time, at the very, very least, have people jot down on a blank sheet of paper or in an email, basically 3 things that went well and why, 3 things that could be improved, and how, if they can articulate that. And that's a good start. All right, choosing a format and sticking with it. This seems intuitive, but it's super important to make sure that it's not so much, you can create whatever format you'd like, but you want to make sure it's consistent throughout and repeatable. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but you can use any variation. You can use the variation of the form that we used in the previous slide there for Katrina. You can develop your own. The sample here breaks observations and recommendations down, and it basically breaks it down by function, such as on-site management and emergency operations center management. But it's really up to you. A go-to for us for years has been a simple 3-section format. Section 1 is a summary of the entire event from a communications perspective. If you're writing it like a news release, inverted pyramid, for those of you that are familiar with that, the who, what, where, when, the how, then you're on the right track there. Section 2 is a bullet list of successes and why they were successes, and Section 3 is a bullet list of lessons learned, what didn't go so well and how it can be improved. Whichever format you go with, you'll want to ensure that it has the characteristics listed there on the left. And by repeatable and consistent, I'm talking about using a format that is easy to reproduce and is clear in terms of the kinds of inputs that you're looking for. And by digestible and actionable, I'm really talking about having it in a format that people will actually understand and that allows for easy implementation of the lessons learned. I think a lot of folks, communicators out there, we all understand that a document is only valuable if people are actually going to read it and use it. Just good things come in small packages. I've learned from incidents that lasted 3 hours. Sometimes I've learned more from those than ones that have lasted 3 months. So the bottom line is, if something occurs that disrupts your organization's normal flow of operations, such as a crisis, it's worth capturing in a lessons learned document one way or another. Just be consistent. So focusing on people rather than processes or from our Canadian listeners, processes, is one of the more prevalent mistakes we see in after action reports. Doing so adds absolutely no value and essentially renders all the benefits we talked about in terms of what an AAR brings to the table. It makes it null and void. I mean, everyone makes mistakes during the fog of war that is a critical incident. So it's important to fight the urge to use an AAR as a tool to call people out. I got an example here. So, feedback in an AAR, like the people doing social media for the incident were horrible, that's not nearly as useful as feedback that's more focused, processed. Social media training for anyone who may do crisis communications will improve performance. I mean, that's an extremely important aspect of an AAR, is making sure that you're focusing on those processes, because people are going to change, people are different, people grow, they learn, they progress. You're going to have, a lot of times you're not going to have the same people in the same incident. So it's really the process that you can affect change on. So And a great example of this we'll talk about a little bit later was the Hawaii false missile crisis. And I can only imagine the temptation to simply blame the guy who hit the send button and call it a day, but to do just that would miss the point entirely. But more on that later. Brief your results, right? So a concise AAR may need some explanation or a question and answer period with your managers, employees, or leadership. So a lot of times forwarding it a PDF or email or printing the report and putting it in the boss's inbox, it may work for some AARs, but especially if you're recommending institutional change based on lessons learned, you'll need some face time. Not only should you socialize the findings with leadership, but leadership should be encouraged to share the insights with employees and those who contributed to those lessons learned. During one of these briefings after Hurricane Sandy, one of the top lessons highlighted was the importance of a multi-model communication program, is what they referred to it as, for mass notification. And it was interesting to me just because the presenter was talking about these legacy systems of mass notification, the old radio broadcasts, the TV, and it wasn't that they were. I think the expectation was that people were going to say these were obsolete, and it wasn't that they were ineffective or obsolete, but they simply what they realized is simply not going to be enough anymore. They're no longer enough by themselves, and leveraging new technology for mass notifications had to be something that was added to the mix, and I thought that was interesting. All right, so the last tip is implementing those lessons. I had a colleague once tell another colleague, so I'm it always stuck with me. But in the absence of implementation, if you're not going to actually implement your lessons learned, then it's really just a lessons observed document. We observe these lessons, but that's about it. And you didn't really learn anything unless you implement it, right? It's all about taking that action. One's proactive and the other approach is passive. So, and we see this a lot because it's obviously natural once a crisis hits the rearview mirror to want to put it squarely behind you. And nobody likes to revisit and rehash something like that. But a failure to implement your lessons learned is a huge missed opportunity. The document you see here on the right was a memo and from leadership within the Coast Guard to implement recommendations that were outlined in the after action report for the BP Deepwater Horizon spill. So a lot of times, if you don't personally possess the authority to implement the change that you think needs to be implemented, the best way to ensure that happens is to have those with the authority make it a priority. And this was a formal direction. This will be done, sort of thing. And once you're armed with that authority to implement the change, the final step is the actual implementation. And the important part of that, and a key to that is giving others the roadmap for doing so. So here you see another document that was created as a result of the Deepwater After Action Report that clearly identifies the change to be implemented, where that recommendation was cited in the After Action Report, and more importantly, the individuals or departments that were responsible for implementing that change. And a step like this makes the organization accountable for implementing those changes, and really is the final step in making sure that you've got a solid after action report, or you get the most out of it. Okay, so just a quick rundown before we go into some of the examples. And again, this is sort of what we just covered, the 7 pro tips, and these are the ones that I think are most important. If you follow these, they're not the only tips, but these are the ones that if you follow, you will be developing a template for learning from, when bad things happen. So very quickly go into a couple of examples that we referred to earlier. The Hawaii false missile alert. I thought that was really interesting. We touched on it earlier. And while I have not seen a formal or official after action report on it yet, I think we can safely make a few observations from that. Again, as opposed to just simply blaming the guy that pressed the button, the false alarm demonstrated it demonstrated the effectiveness and power and reach of that particular alert system. Even though the incorrect information was sent, it highlighted how quickly and simultaneously the public could be aware of something when it's done right. So that's a sustain. That's something that that an organization would want to make a note of. The need for clear policies and procedures. This gap highlighted the need for a company to have technology, policies, and procedures in place that are designed to mitigate these types of things. Ensure your mass notification system is simple. During a crisis, information often needs to be sent as it becomes available, which requires a system that allows for a quick and flexible sending of information, which they did not have. Two-person approval process or other fail-safe might be something that they would consider, especially for things that are this sensitive. And also, again, back to the flexibility and agility. It took a while, I think up to 40 minutes for them to follow up with a message that said it was a false alarm. And that was because the system and the approval processes in place weren't built to be flexible or agile enough to send out that quick follow-up message. Are we doing on time here? I think we're good. One last example, very recent. The fires in Sonoma, California last year. This comes from a very recent report, actually, I just read this week from the state of California regarding lessons learned from the county's emergency managers' response to these wildfires. And just a few takeaways from that. During the poor situational awareness, so during the early hours of the disaster, the report says that the county lacked reliable, timely, and coordinated situational awareness as to the scale, size, and scope of the fire. The notification systems that they had in place were not flexible. Apparently, the system in place did not have the flexibility or ability to target specific communities and populations. So emergency managers were reluctant to use it for fear of creating panic in areas that weren't really affected. They also cited a lack of checklist. A specific quote from the report said, checklists or detailed procedures for deciding what warnings to issue, when, and in what form appeared to be almost entirely absent. And then lastly, and we don't think about this a lot, it is, in these situations, the ability to compose a message that is going to make sense and get through to folks. So the report included a recommendation for training people on how to compose effective emergency messages. When human life and property is being threatened, people don't process information the same way. You've got to be very clear and concise in the information you put out to people to make sure that they're doing the things they need to do to make your life easier and obviously to protect their life and property. Very quick plug. That's all I've got on After Actions, but a quick plug. I'm way more entertaining, believe me, in person. If you've never been to the historic Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, we're hosting a 2-day crisis comms workshop in April. You can see visit the link at the bottom. It's ideal for anyone who communicates with stakeholders during critical incidents that particularly threaten public health, safety, and environment. It's not on the slide here, but people that signed up for this webinar can get a deep discount for if they enter the Crisis Comms VIP 18. I think we'll share that with folks later, but Crisis Comms VIP 18 is the discount code. And I'll kick it over to Daniel. Thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to click it over too. There we go.
Excellent. Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. And then as far as PocketStop is concerned, if anybody on the phone today wants more information about a crisis communication platform, the ability to send messages to your employees and or to your tenants, then please go to pocketstop.com and /request a demo, or simply pocketstop.com, and you can follow the signs when you're there. So as a reminder, a couple of other things. Number one is please put your questions, if you have any questions for myself or for Paul, into the box there. And number two, today, the presentation, we get asked a lot about the presentations and how we can get access to the information. There is a handout down on your screen, is uploaded, so you can actually go to the handout section and click to download today's presentation. If you have any problems with that, feel free to let us know and reach out to us directly, and we will absolutely send you a copy of the presentation. Okay, so Paul, we do have one question coming in so far. The first question is, in your experience, what is the most common lesson or breakdown that organizations identify in this post crisis analysis that they do? Is there a common one that most organizations see?
There is, and really, it's the agility and speed at which information is able to get sort of verified and processed and then put out. Especially with a lot of the organizations we work with and the larger responses, there's a lot of concern in terms of making sure that what's being said needs to be said. There's politics that get involved. There's other things that sort of influence, especially if it's a disaster or something where there's potentially an organization that's at fault or perceived to be at fault. A lot of times their tendency is to not want to share information. And so the biggest is sort of the agility of and having in the plan ahead of time sort of the authority to communicate very basic information to impacted stakeholders as soon as possible to sort of get out ahead of it and to sort of establish themselves as the best source of information before other people start to become part of the narrative that may or may not have the organization's best interests or the accurate information to begin with at hand. So that's a huge one that pops out.
Excellent. Okay, another question here. The examples that you gave are about large crises that affect large numbers of people. This person is asking when they're just a single person at a location, at a small business, what are some of the things that you think are translatable there when we're talking about they're going to have the situations and crises are going to be smaller. So what are some of the lessons learned on these big examples that we should be boiling down and taking from this when we're just dealing with smaller companies and smaller locations?
Sure. Yeah. Well, communication and the tenets and the principles of communicating with people that are impacted, even if it's an IT issue, nothing more frustrating than walking into work and you can't do your job because your IT's down, which is not, again, it's probably more your area too, Daniel, but ultimately it's about sort of the frustration of needing information, feeling like you're not in control of what's going on, feeling like something's impacting your day at various levels of severity, and the communication, the importance of communicating directly, quickly, simply, empathetically, that never goes out of style, no matter what the scope or scale of the response is. It's people, when they're having a bad day, they need information that helps them to sort of get through that.
Excellent. Another question, looks like it's more for me, is how can PocketStop specifically help companies during their crisis plan? Well, the examples that I would give is that we provide resources such as Paul today, and on a regular basis look out for webinars from Paul and from other members that we can provide intel and experiences from other people, because the best way to learn lessons is always on someone else's mistakes rather than on your own. So we certainly provide resources there. And of course, the whole purpose of the Red Flag platform is to be part of an existing crisis communication plan. We consult with typically organizations to discover what they have inside of their existing plans, and then how does Red Flag help to facilitate and improve and carry out the portion of that. But I would tell you that there's three sort of areas, as I mentioned at the top of this call, with any crisis. It's about preparation, it's about informing, and it's about gathering. And preparation is really in every aspect. Preparation is all about what do we do? We can't foresee every disaster. Maybe a hurricane, we can see it coming, but most of the time a disaster is unplanned. But how we prepare for when the unexpected happens makes a huge difference in how we react and how prepared we are when the situation occurs. Our piece of the crisis planning comes in when we're talking about the informing and the gathering, because keeping people up to date, people expect real-time information in non-emergency situations. They expect to be told things and kept up to date in non-emergencies. So you can only imagine, you better believe that they expect it in the case of when. And what does a crisis mean? A crisis means different things to everybody. It could be an IT outage, it could be modified hours, it could be weather alerts. But when something happens, people expect to be kept informed. They don't want to have to go looking for that information. So what Red Flag is used for is continuing to keep people up to date. And then lastly, we don't always have the answers. When we're sending out the information, our job is to keep people informed, but at the same time, we don't want to make promises or make speculations, because that's when panic ensues. So our platform can help you gather the data, gather the information that maybe you don't already have readily at your fingertips, but some of your employees, some of your tenants may know more than you, and you can start to gather that feedback and then use that to take action and to keep people safe, to keep people informed during the crisis and during the situation. Okay, we have another question. Any tips for trying to complete an effective AAR with very low staffing base? It's hard to get the kind of documentation shown with smaller staff. So, or maybe you can sort of describe that, how we do these things when we're a smaller number of people.
Yeah, it really that is a challenge, and what it comes down to is identifying a process and a system that so you're not, we talked about creating an AAR, and some of those key attributes is it needs to be repeatable, it needs to be actionable, and part of that is depending on the organization, depending on the resources, the human capital you have for something like that. It may just be a very simple 1, 2, 3, one pager, sort of making, a note of it, writing down, it doesn't even have, one or two things that they thought went well, one or two things that didn't go well. It doesn't take a lot of time, especially if you're keeping track as things are going. If you have to do it after the fact, if you don't have time to do it while you're managing the incident, that makes sense, and that's fine. Ideally, you want to do it as close as possible to the incident so you don't forget sort of things that were happening. But bottom line is put something together, no matter how small. A lot of like I had mentioned, a lot of our after action reports, they're one page, and it's really just a series of observations of this is what we need to keep doing, and this is what we probably should look at. And it's not always going to be perfect. And I'm assuming that when you're talking about a smaller staff, it may be you don't have the opportunity to monitor everything that's going on, maybe, or you just don't simply have the time. And it's just a matter of the thing with an AR is you can make it whatever you want in terms of the actual template. And if simple works, then simple's good. And it might just be a matter of, if you've got a small group, getting down and sitting down in a room at some point and just going around the room and having someone document, the things that were observed, and then putting that in a sheet, putting that in a one-page document and implementing from there. So, yeah.
We are running out of time. We do have a few more questions. So for those that I didn't get to, we will definitely follow up. But the last question that we have here is, how do you deal with the propensity of leadership to refuse to comment or withhold information from the public or the media?
Oh, that is a tough question. That is one of the $1 million questions, and we all face it, and a lot of it is it's the culture of an organization. There's only so much you can change, but there's a couple of different things. A lot of it I've found is if you've done your preparation, if you've sort of identified as a communicator, if you're the corporate communicator for your organization, one of the things we recommend is, as you is to develop sort of these scenarios, these bad day scenarios we talk about, and going to leadership and developing at least a couple of page, a white paper, something that sort of outlines the things that could go wrong, and then in there somewhere, here's how we would respond to that. So I guess what I'm getting at is you sort of have to build a relationship with leadership of credibility as a communicator. If you've got certain personalities that just are not going to allow you to communicate with the agility you need to, you have to do, I feel like, as a communicator, as a corporate communicator, as a crisis communicator, you have to do your best to try to educate them as to the value. It's counterintuitive. When something's going bad, of course, leadership doesn't want to talk about it, but it's extremely counterintuitive. And there's so many case studies. And I would go back to AARs. You can pull after action reports going back decades where the after action report, it was, at the time, in the top of the lessons learned was leadership did not get out in front of it. Leadership did not comment on this. Leadership did not sort of take ownership of it. And you just sort of, I don't want to say fear tactics, but you do, as an advisor to your leadership, you want to point those things out. You want to have a library of examples where taking that approach just doesn't work. And it's been documented time and time again.
Well, fantastic. Well, as I said, we are out of time, but a couple of just reminders. Number one, there is a handout. So for those of you that want to get a copy, please feel free to take that. Number two, as you leave today's presentation and exit out, you will be asked for some feedback. We would love to hear feedback both about today's presentation, but specifically, as the question alluded to earlier, what we do. We are always putting on educational seminars and webinars like this. So as you leave, one of the questions will be, what topics and what information would you like to learn in the future? So please feel free to give us that feedback, and we'll do our best to provide that type of webinar next time. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you, Paul, for all of the great information, and look forward to hopefully having you all on the future webinar. Bye-bye.